So I'm going to introduce our panelists as well as our moderator and let them get started. We have Dorothy Wetzel, a leading innovator in consumer healthcare arena for over 25 years. Dorothy is the founder of Extra Verdict. Prior to Extra Verdict, she was the EVP at Glowworm, as well as SVP prior to that at Saatchi & Saatchi on the AstraZeneca account, I believe. And before joining the agency world was VP Consumer Marketing at Pfizer and drove the development of Pfizer's industry-leading patient marketing capabilities. So Dorothy, welcome to the panel. We have Michael Spitz, who's currently SVP of Zemoga and a prolific blogger there. Previously was at Ignite Health with a background in medical editing and writing, and is self-proclaimed tech geek, probably best described as the intersection between healthcare, communications, and technology. So thanks for joining us, Mike. And David Goldsmith, who's the SVP of New Markets and Partnerships, overseeing strategic alliances, joint ventures, and industry partnerships for Alliance Health. He's led the company's strategic relationships with organizations such as Mayo Clinic, Joslin Diabetes Center, and Consumer Reports. His background in new media includes more than 12 years of consulting for a diverse range of philanthropic organizations and social enterprises, including the Commonwealth Fund, California Healthcare Foundation, Ford Foundation, and Grant Makers in Health. And I feel like any introduction I can offer for our moderator is insufficient after last night's accolades, but I'd like to introduce our moderator for the panel and newly inducted Hall of Fame member, Stu Klein. Stu?
I have a loud voice.
And in trying to move on beyond last night, I'll try to keep this more interactive, and that way, hopefully things will begin to feel better. So the point of this panel is, we all know that if you try to find out what's being said about your brand, there's a lot of stuff being said about your brand, your category, disease state, et cetera. And we all know that whatever we do, that's all going to happen anyway. So the real point of this is to try to figure out with our experts here how we can really try to get out ahead, how can we interact, how can we actually try to influence a lot of that discussions that's there. So, I know it's day 2, and I know a lot of people joined us last night, so try to make this a little more interactive. We're going to try to take questions during this, so please feel free. I'll just be on the lookout for raised hands or things like that. So I think just to start out, and you'll just go in order, Dorothy, if you don't mind leading us off.
Sure.
Just if you could just talk a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had interacting or trying at least to interact with what is being said about brands on which you've worked.
Sure. I probably have to talk a little bit more theoretically, but I think one of the important things to think about is customer service and responding to patients online who have difficulties. I think some of the great things I've seen are things like AstraZeneca. AZ helps when people complain about, I had a side effect, or I had, I couldn't pay for my medication. AZ has an automatic response. I think we're seeing BI answering patients. There was one Twitter, of course it was overseas, but I think the important thing to think about is really pharmaceuticals companies have all the capabilities to do this in-house already. You have a call center that knows how to escalate information and answer patients. You have PR that knows how to come up with standard messages, and you have IT that knows how to use the tracking, knows how to use data to track, and you can get the information from the patients and then respond in ways that won't get you in trouble and will really endear you to consumers.
Yeah, diabetes is a chronic condition that requires daily, often hourly tweaking, whether it's the measurement of blood levels, the administration of insulin. It's complex and it's interwoven with the utilization of medical devices. So it's an optimal space to engage established bloggers within the community who have a reputation within that community, and then contextually share some of that information and stimulate and empower engaging conversations. So I had an opportunity to work in that space a little bit. My coworker there, Ross Federoff, can relate to some of these experiences within the diabetes space, but you've got a highly involved online community of patients, literally in the tens of millions, engaging in discussions, and they're talking about everything from overall health conditions to the specificities of utilizing specific devices. So it's an optimal opportunity basically for the device manufacturers themselves and even the providers of insulin to engage the community through the transparent utilization of these bloggers who have established reputations within the field to really stimulate those conversations. Conversations that are going on naturally,
Exactly.
they're conversations that are going on contextually. And as long as that relationship is respectful, it's reciprocated in both directions, it's transparent, it's a great opportunity, and it's proven itself to be a great opportunity within that space to take advantage of that blogger-patient relationship and correlate it to unbranded and even branded conversations so long that respect and transparency factor is there. So that's a tangible example of using bloggers within the space in a mutually respectful and useful manner.
Great. David, do you want to jump in?
I think Spitz was, is this on? Can you hear me? I think Spitz was reviewing my notes this morning. So, Alliance Health, a couple of years ago, purchased Diabetes Mind, having worked with Amy Tenderich. Some of you may know Amy. She's a very prominent blogger in diabetes, a type 1 diabetic herself. And we were really intrigued with the level of engagement that we were seeing, particularly with kind of the long-form blog format, which is an interesting and stark contrast to a lot of what we see on our Diabetic Connect social network, where people are typically responding more briefly and not getting into the level of detail that you see not only with Amy and her blogging, but with several of the staff and guest bloggers that she has brought on board. And you really don't have to spend a whole lot of time browsing Diabetes Mind to see examples exactly along the lines that Mike is talking about, where there are a number of product reviews from people who are using these devices, have strong feelings one way or the other about how well these glucometers, insulin pumps, and so forth are working. And then you, of course, not only see the blogger perspective, but you begin to get a lot of the reader response, which is an integral part of the entire, dynamic. And what's shocking in most cases is the absence of the voice of the manufacturer on those blogs. And you can see it among the elements of transparency you can see it right there on the blog, how many people have viewed that blog post. So you can see in some cases 5,000, 6,000 views. So you know that those are people who are potentially going to either buy those devices or who may be using those devices today. And so there are, fortunately, and we'll get to a couple of these, some examples of where manufacturers have been proactive, very responsive, and acknowledged the comments and criticisms of their devices. But I will say those tend to be the exceptions. In most cases, there is a stunning absence of a voice there that allows people to know that, yeah, we're listening, yes, we're hearing you, yes, we're going to try to make improvements or tweaks or whatever going forward.
Cool. Thank you. Yes? Anybody want to take that?
Well, in the form of sponsorships, and the sponsorships basically empower a blogger to stimulate conversations within certain areas. The conversations, obviously, given the nature of the exchange, aren't limited to a particular branded product or conversation. There's also prescriptive recommendations for the blogger so that if the conversation starts to go tangential or go along the lines of a very specific branded discussion, then there's the instruction to cross-link to the brand.com, or there might be an instruction to engage an individual from the medical device or pharma organization. So there are some rules of engagement. They tend to be fairly broad, but the whole notion is just stimulating conversation that isn't particularly limited or driven to the particular brand or medical device, but basically having an individual who knows how to respond to certain questions and then drive that conversation or that individual who are making these queries to a particular source of authoritative branded information that actually lies outside of the blogging and conversation itself. I think that's an important point to make. The FDA issued some guidance about how to handle solicited and unsolicited conversations. And basically, in a nutshell, it's about once you establish certain criteria for when a conversation flips or when an inquiry is made, what should a pharmaceutical or medical device company do in the advent that that touch point is reached? And again, the FDA was fairly prescriptive. They provided some criteria. You should provide basically a source to go to. You should be transparent. And then there should be some boilerplate, which is, again, approved internally and then shared in a way where you're facilitating that transference from a conversation which is elliptical and broad within a public forum into a more private conversation between the individual making that query and then the company responsible for that brand or product with authoritative information within a customer service type of environment.
I think it's important to realize that we're not the only ones handling sensitive information. Companies like FedEx has a very robust online presence and talks to people. Banks talk to people, and they often have to take conversations offline because patients or people put their bank account numbers and they have to grab them offline, or tracking numbers. I think so it's important to realize that a lot of people have to take, companies have to take things offline.